The massive doors of the Galactic Council chambers opened with a deep rumble that echoed through the vast hall. Representatives from 12 different alien species filed in, their various forms creating a strange parade of shapes and colors. Some walked on legs, others floated through the air, and a few rolled forward on mechanical wheels. At the human table sat Ambassador Hyansik, a man in his 50s with gray hair and tired eyes. He'd been fighting for human rights in the galaxy for over 20 years, and today felt like his most important battle yet. Next to him sat a much smaller man named Taman, who appeared to be in his early 30s. Taman wore simple brown robes and carried an old leather bag filled with translation devices and notebooks. The other alien representatives barely looked at the humans as they took their seats. To them, humans were the newest and weakest species in the galactic community. They had only discovered faster-than-light travel 50 years ago, while some of the other species had been exploring space for thousands of years. Tay-Min. He had been working as an interpreter for the human diplomatic corps for 12 years. Most aliens thought he was just a living computer, someone who turned their words from one language to another. They never bothered to learn his name or speak to him directly. The chamber itself was enormous, with a dome ceiling that showed the stars outside. Each species had their own section with special equipment to help them breathe and communicate. The air smelled of different gases and chemicals that each alien race needed to survive. At the center of the room sat the Mediator, a being from the ethereal collective. It looked like a cloud of glowing energy that constantly shifted between different colors. The ethereals were one of the oldest species in the galaxy, and they believed they were the wisest. They had appointed themselves as judges for most galactic disputes. The session began when the Mediator's voice filled the chamber. It spoke in a musical tone that the translation devices turned into words everyone could understand. "We are here today to discuss the recent incidents in human space," the Mediator said. "The Vorthok Empire has requested this hearing to present their side of the events." The Vorthok representative stood up from his seat. He was a creature that looked like a giant insect, standing nearly 3 meters tall. His body was covered in dark green armor-like skin, and his head had large compound eyes and sharp mandibles that clicked when he spoke. "Honored Mediator," the Vorthok said, his voice making a buzzing sound. "The Vorthok Empire regrets the unfortunate incidents that occurred in the Outer Rim territories. However, we must clarify that these events were not unprovoked attacks, as the humans claim." Taman listened carefully and translated the words into Korean for Ambassador Hyansik. His voice was calm and steady, showing no emotion even though he was hearing about the deaths of his own people. The Vorthok continued his speech. "The human colonies on planets Kepler 44b and Kepler 438b were engaged in illegal mining operations. They were extracting rare minerals that belonged to the Vorthok Empire, according to ancient territorial claims. When we sent ships to investigate, the humans attacked our vessels first." Taman translated these words as well, but Ambassador Hyansik could see his interpreter's hands were shaking slightly. The humans in the chamber knew these claims were lies. The planets had been properly colonized by humans, and the families living there had been peaceful farmers and scientists. Furthermore, the Vorthok representative clicked his mandibles. "Our response was measured and appropriate. We only used the minimum force necessary to defend ourselves." As Taman translated this statement, several other alien representatives nodded in agreement. They seemed to accept the Vorthok's version of events without question, but Taman knew the truth. The Vorthok had not sent investigation ships. They'd sent war vessels. The attacks were not responses to human aggression. They were planned massacres. The Vorthok warrior continued describing the events, but his version was completely different from what had actually happened. He claimed that human children had been trained as soldiers, and that the colonies were actually military bases. Each lie was translated faithfully by Taman, his voice never changing tone. But those who knew him well could see signs of his growing anger. His breathing had become very controlled and deliberate. His fingers gripped his pen so tightly that his knuckles were white. The real truth was horrible beyond words. The Vorthok had arrived at the human colonies without warning. They had targeted civilian areas first, destroying schools and hospitals, Families had been killed while eating dinner together. Children had been turned to ash while playing in their yards. 137,000 humans had died in those attacks. Men, women, children, and elderly people who had never held a weapon in their lives. The survivors who escaped told stories of Vorthok soldiers laughing as they burned entire neighborhoods. The Vorthok representative showed holographic evidence to support his claims. The images showed what appeared to be human military installations and weapons factories. But Taman could see that these images had been altered. The buildings that looked like weapons factories were actually schools and community centers. The evidence clearly shows, the Vorthok said, that the humans were preparing for war against the Vorthok Empire. Our actions were preventive measures. To protect our people, several alien representatives murmured their agreement. The machine race called the Nexus sent clicking sounds that their translators turned into words of support. A floating jellyfish-like creature from the Depth Federation pulsed with colors that meant approval. Ambassador Hyansik stood up to present the human side of the story. He showed real evidence from the colonies before the attacks. Pictures of children playing, farmers working in fields, scientists studying local plants and animals. His voice shook with emotion as he described the peaceful communities that had been destroyed. These were not military bases, Hyansik said. These were homes. People who died were innocent civilians who had never threatened anyone. Mediator listened to both sides, but it was clear that most of the alien representatives had already made up their minds. They believed the Vorthok version of events because the Vorthok were stronger and more established in galactic politics. As the day continued, more and more evidence was presented. The Vorthok showed fake communications that they claimed proved human aggression. They brought witnesses who told obviously rehearsed stories about human attacks. Through it all, Timon continued to translate. His voice remained steady and professional. But the temperature in the chamber seemed to be getting colder. Some of the psychic alien species began to feel uncomfortable, though they could not explain why. When the hearing ended for the day, it was clear that the Galactic Council was going to side with the Vorthok Empire. The aliens saw humans as weak newcomers who probably deserved what happened to them. As the representatives filed out of the chamber, the Vorthok representative walked past the human table. He looked down at Ambassador Hyansik with amusement. In his compound eyes, "Your species should learn to know its place in the galaxy," the Vorthok said quietly. "Perhaps this lesson will teach you not to reach beyond your capabilities." Taman looked up at the towering insect creature. For just a moment, something flickered in the translator's eyes, something deep and ancient and powerful. Representative felt a chill run through his exoskeleton. But he dismissed it as imagination. After all, what could a simple human translator possibly do to threaten the mighty Vorthok Empire? That night, as the other humans prepared for another day of hopeless appeals, Taman sat alone in his quarters. He was meditating, as he did every evening. But tonight was different. Tonight, he was preparing for something that he had hoped never to do. The galaxy was about to learn that some humans were not as powerless as they appeared. The human diplomatic quarters were quiet that night, but not peaceful. Ambassador Hyansik paced back and forth across the main room like a caged animal. His footsteps echoed off the metal walls as he walked from one end of the room to the other, then back again. "This is impossible," Hyansik said, running his hands through his gray hair. "They will not listen to us. They have already decided that we are guilty." Young Ho, the ambassador's assistant, sat at a small table covered with documents and data. Tablets. He was a young man in his 20s who had joined the diplomatic service because he wanted to help humanity find its place among the stars. Now he was learning how cruel that place could be. "Maybe we can appeal to the Ethereal Council directly," Young Ho suggested. "Or contact the Trade Federation. Surely someone will listen to reason." Hyansik stopped pacing and looked at his assistant. With sad eyes, "Young Ho, you still think this is about reason? This is about power? The Vorthok have it, and we do not. In their minds, that makes us wrong, no matter what the truth is." In the corner of the room, Taman sat cross-legged on a meditation cushion. His eyes were closed and his breathing was slow and deep. He had been sitting this way for over an hour, perfectly still except for the gentle rise and fall of his chest. Mijin, the delegation's cultural expert, watched Timon with growing concern. She had known him since their days at the diplomatic academy 15 years ago. They had been classmates, studying together to become bridges between humanity and the alien species they would encounter among the stars. Mijin was a woman in her 30s with kind eyes and a gentle smile. She specialized in understanding how different alien cultures thought and communicated. But right now, she was more worried about understanding her old friend. Timon has been meditating for hours, Mijin said quietly to the others. This is not normal, even for him. Young-ho looked over at the translator. Maybe he is just trying to deal with the stress. We all handle bad news differently. But Mijin shook her head. She had seen Timon meditate many times over the years, but never like this. Usually, his meditation was peaceful and calm. Tonight, there was something different. The air around him seemed to hum with energy that she could not quite identify. Vorthok think they are strong because they have big weapons, Timon said suddenly, his eyes still closed. His voice was quiet but clear in the small room. The others stopped talking and looked at him. They had not expected him to speak. Ethereals believe they are wise because they can read minds and see through time, Timon continued. The machine race thinks they are superior because they can calculate faster than any biological brain. And what do humans have? Mijin asked softly. Though she was not sure she wanted to hear the answer, Timon opened his eyes and looked at her. For just a moment, Mijin thought she saw something impossible in those eyes. It looked like tiny stars spinning in the darkness, like entire galaxies being born and dying in the space of a heartbeat. Humans understand connection, Timon said. We know that everything in the universe is linked together. Every atom, every star, every living thing. We remember the words that were spoken when all of this began. Young-ho laughed, but it was not a happy sound. That is beautiful poetry, Timon. But poetry will not bring back the dead, will not stop the Vorthok from killing more of our people. Timon stood up from his meditation cushion. He moved with a strange grace, like someone who was perfectly balanced in ways that went beyond the physical. Words created everything that exists, he said. Before there was matter, before there was energy, before there were stars or planets or life, there was the word. Some humans still remember how to speak it. The room fell silent. Outside their quarters, they could hear the sounds of alien species. Moving through the corridors of the diplomatic station, strange music and clicking sounds and electronic beeps that came from beings who had evolved on worlds they had never seen.
What are you saying?
She had studied dozens of alien religions and philosophies. But something about the way Timon spoke made her feel like she was hearing about something much older and more real than any theology. I'm saying that tomorrow, when the council meets, again, they will hear the truth, Timon replied. Not the lies that the Vorthok have constructed, but the actual truth of what happened to our people. Hyansik stopped pacing and turned to face his translator. Our evidence. They have already decided that the Vorthok are telling the truth. They will listen, Timon said with quiet certainty, because I will speak words that cannot be ignored. The next morning came too soon. The human delegation walked through the corridors of the diplomatic station toward the council chambers. Other alien representatives passed them in the hallways, most ignoring the humans completely. A few looked at them with something that might have been pity. The Vorthok representative strode past them with confidence. His massive insect form clicking against the metal floor, was surrounded by his own advisors and guards, all of them radiating the arrogance of a species that had never known defeat. Pathetic little mammals, one of the Vorthok guards said in their buzzing language, loud, enough for the humans to hear. They still think someone will save them. Timon translated the insult for his colleagues, but his voice showed no emotion. However, Mijin noticed that the temperature in the corridor seemed to drop several degrees as he spoke. Inside the council chambers, the proceedings began exactly as they had the day before. The ethereal mediator called the session to order, its energy form pulsing with colors that indicated boredom and impatience. We will now hear final arguments from both parties, the mediator announced. The Vorthok Empire will present their concluding evidence first. The Vorthok representative stood and activated a holographic display that filled the center of the chamber. The images showed what appeared to be human military installations and weapons manufacturing facilities. You can see, The Vorthok said the human colonies were clearly preparing for aggressive action against Vorthok territory. Our intelligence reports indicated that they planned to launch attacks within the next galactic standard year. Taman translated the words, but several alien species in the chamber began to feel uneasy. The psychic races started shifting in their seats, sensing something they could not identify. The energy-based life forms flickered more rapidly than usual. The Vorthok continued, presenting their fabricated evidence. They showed communications that they claimed proved human military planning. They brought forward witnesses who told obviously rehearsed stories about human aggression and territorial expansion. The evidence is overwhelming, the Vorthok concluded. The humans forced us to take action to protect ourselves. We regret the loss of life, but the blame lies entirely with human leadership. Murmurs of agreement rippled through the chamber. Most of the alien representatives were nodding, or making their species equivalent gestures of approval. The ethereal mediator turned toward the human delegation. Ambassador Hyansik, do you have any final arguments to present? Hyansik started to stand, but Taman placed a gentle hand on his arm.
Oh, Taman said quietly.
I do. He stood up slowly, and as he did, something changed in the vast chamber. The constant background hum of alien technology seemed to quiet. The artificial lights flickered slightly. Several of the more sensitive alien species suddenly felt like they were standing on the edge of a great cliff, looking down into an abyss that had no bottom. I have something to say, Taman announced, his voice carrying clearly through the chamber even though he was not speaking loudly. The ethereal mediator's energy form solidified slightly, showing surprise. Translator, you have no standing in these proceedings. You are here only to provide language services. Taman reached into his robes and pulled out a small pendant that hung on a simple chain around his neck. The pendant was made of some kind of dark metal and carved with symbols that seemed to shift and change when anyone looked at them directly. Several of the oldest alien species in the chamber gasped when they saw the pendant. The few remaining members of the ancient archive delegation stood up in shock. Even the arrogant Vorthok representative took a step backward. I am not here only as a translator, Taman said. I am here as a speaker of the first tongue. The chamber erupted in chaos. Alien voices buzzed and clicked and sang in dozens of different languages. Some representatives demanded to know what was happening. Others whispered in fear about legends they had thought were only myths. The ethereal mediator tried to restore order, but for the first time in centuries their psychic abilities seemed muted and weak. That is impossible, the mediator said, though their voice carried uncertainty. The speakers died out millions of years ago. There are no more speakers in the galaxy. Taman looked directly at the swirling energy being, and when he spoke, his voice carried weight that seemed to press down on everyone in the chamber. There is one, he said, and I call for justice under the oldest law. The chaos in the council chamber grew louder as alien representatives tried to understand what was happening. Some species had never heard of the speakers, while others knew them only as legends from the earliest days of galactic civilization. The ancient archive delegation, made up of beings who collected and preserved knowledge from across the galaxy, huddled together in excited whispers. Their leader, an ancient creature that looked like a walking tree covered in glowing crystals, spoke in a voice like wind through leaves. The speakers were said to know the language that created the universe. The archive leader explained to confused delegates nearby. They could command reality itself with their words. But that was supposed to be just a myth. The Vorthok representative recovered from his initial shock and clicked his mandibles angrily. This is ridiculous superstition. We are modern beings of science and technology. We will not be fooled by primitive magic tricks. Taman turned to look at the towering insect warrior. When their eyes met, the Vorthok felt something cold creep up his spine. The human's eyes seemed deeper than they should be, like looking into the space between stars. Magic? Taman asked quietly. Is that what you call the force that holds atoms together? The energy that makes stars burn? Is the power that allows thoughts to exist in biological brains? He took a step forward, and somehow that single step seemed to echo through the entire chamber. The sound bounced off the walls again and again, getting louder instead of fading away. Everything you see around you exists because of words. Taman continued. The first words that were spoken when the universe began. Most beings have forgotten this truth. They think reality just happened by accident. The ethereal mediator tried to use their psychic powers to calm the situation, but found that their mental abilities were somehow blocked. It was like trying to shine a flashlight through thick fog. Even if such power existed, the mediator said, no one has seen a true speaker in millions of years. How do we know you are not simply lying? Taman smiled sadly. Because I will show you. He began to speak, but not in any language the universal translators could understand. The sounds that came from his mouth were strange and musical, like singing and speaking at the same time. But they were also more than sounds. Each syllable seemed to vibrate through the air, through the metal walls of the station, through the bodies of everyone present. Some of the alien delegates covered their ears, but the words reached them anyway. The sounds were not just heard but felt in their bones, in their blood, in the deepest parts of their minds. The Vorthok representative tried to speak, to interrupt this display, but found that his voice would not work. Every time he opened his mandibles to make sound, the strange words Taman was speaking somehow absorbed his attempts at speech, as Taman continued. The false evidence the Vorthok had presented began to change. The holographic images of supposed human military bases flickered and shifted. The buildings that had looked like weapons factories slowly transformed, showing their true nature as schools and hospitals and homes. The fake communications that claimed to prove human aggression started to dissolve like smoke. In their place, new images appeared. Real recordings from the human colonies showing families living peaceful lives, children playing in gardens, scientists studying alien plants to better understand their new worlds. This is impossible, whispered a delegate. From the machine race? Holographic data cannot be altered without direct access to the projection systems. But Taman was not accessing any technology. He was speaking to reality itself, asking it to show the truth instead of the lies that had been built on top of it. The corrupted witnesses that the Vorthok had brought forward began to shake and tremble. They tried to repeat their false testimony, but different words came out of their mouths. Words that told the real story of what had happened. The Vorthok came without warning, one witness said, though he was clearly trying to say something else. They targeted the civilian areas first, and wanted to cause maximum terror. Another witness, a traitor who had been paid to lie about human aggression, found himself describing the truth instead. I saw Vorthok soldiers laughing as they burned the schools. They were not defending themselves, or enjoying the killing. The chamber fell silent, except for Taman's continuing speech in the first tongue. With each word he spoke, more truth was revealed. The real events on the human colonies became clear to everyone present. But Taman was not finished. He spoke. Another phrase, longer and more complex than the others. This time, the words did not just reveal truth. They made everyone in the chamber experience it. Suddenly, every alien representative could feel what the human colonists had felt in their final moments. Not just see or hear about it, but actually experience the terror, the pain, the desperate love of parents trying to protect their children. The Nexus machine delegate, who normally felt no emotions, found itself overwhelmed by waves of fear and grief. The floating jellyfish creature from the Depth Federation pulsed rapidly through colors that indicated extreme distress. The Vorthok representative collapsed to his knees, making sounds like grinding metal. He was experiencing the deaths of every human his people had killed, feeling each life end as if it were his own. "Stop," he gasped. "Please, make it stop." But Taman continued speaking. The emotional weight of 137,000 deaths filled the chamber. Delegates who had dismissed human suffering as unimportant were now drowning in the reality of what that suffering had been. The ethereal mediator tried desperately to restore order, but found that their powers were completely useless. Whatever force Taman was channeling was far older and stronger than anything they had ever encountered. "This is what you approved," Taman said. Finally returning to the common language but keeping the power of the first tongue underneath his words, "This is what you were willing to ignore. Feel it, know it, remember it. Yumho and Mijin watched their colleague in amazement and growing fear. The quiet translator they had known for years was revealing himself to be something beyond their understanding. The air around him seemed to shimmer with energy that made their eyes water to look at directly. "The first tongue," whispered the ancient archive leader, "is the language that named the stars and set them spinning in their courses. If he truly speaks it, then he speaks with the authority of creation itself." The images of death and destruction finally faded from the chamber, but their impact remained burned into every mind present. The silence that followed was heavy with the weight of truth that could no longer be denied. Taman looked around the chamber at the alien representatives who had been so quick to dismiss human lives as unimportant. "Now," he said, his voice carrying the deep power of the words that had shaped the universe, "let me tell you what justice truly means." The council chamber remained silent as Taman stood at the center of the room. The power that flowed through his words had left every alien representative shaken. Many were still recovering from experiencing the deaths of the human colonists, as if they had been their own. The Vorthok representative was still on his knees, his large compound eyes reflecting a terror that his species had never known before. He had felt the fear of every human child who had died in the attacks. He had experienced the pain of every parent who had tried to shield their family from Vorthok weapons. "The oldest law," Taman said, his voice calm but carrying the weight of stars, "is simple. It existed before your civilizations learned to travel between worlds. It was written into the foundation of reality itself." He began to walk slowly around the chamber, looking at each alien representative as he passed. Where his gaze fell, beings who had ruled star systems for millennia found themselves feeling small and uncertain. "The law says that all life is connected," Taman continued. "When you harm one, you harm all. When you take a life, you create a debt that must be paid. The Vorthok Empire has created a very large debt." The ethereal mediator tried to speak to regain control of the proceedings. "Even if what you say is true, we have procedures here. Laws and treaties that govern how justice is administered." Taman stopped walking and looked directly at the swirling energy being. "Your laws are built on the foundation of the oldest law. They exist because the first tongue spoke them into being. I am that foundation speaking now." He raised his hand, and the chamber filled with a low humming sound that seemed to come from everywhere at once. The metal walls vibrated. The artificial gravity fluctuated. Several alien devices stopped working as the energy field around Taman interfered with their technology. 137,812 human lives were taken, Taman said. "I felt each death as it happened. I heard every final word. I saw every last moment of love and fear and hope." Duhain, a junior member of the human delegation, watched in amazement as his colleague revealed powers that seemed impossible. He had worked with Taman for 3 years, sharing meals and casual conversations. The quiet man, who helped translate documents, was showing himself to be something beyond human understanding. "How long have you known?" Duhain whispered to Mijin. "I suspected something was different about him," she replied quietly. "I never imagined anything like this." The ancient archive leader spoke up from their section of the chamber. "You truly speak the first tongue? Then you have the authority to invoke the oldest law. But that law requires balance. What balance do you seek?" Taman turned to face the tree-like being, the balance of justice. "The Vorthok must face the consequences of their actions, but I am not here to destroy. I am here to teach." He spoke another phrase in the first tongue. And suddenly, the Vorthok representative could speak again. The insect warrior gasped and struggled to his feet, his exoskeleton still trembling from the experience he had just endured. "Please," the Vorthok said, his voice no longer arrogant but filled with genuine fear. "We will pay compensation. We will withdraw from human space. We'll sign treaties promising never to attack your people again." "Words," Taman said simply. "Your species has broken words before. Treaties mean nothing to those who believe strength is the only truth." The chamber held its breath as Taman considered what form justice should take. The power that flowed through him was vast enough to destroy the entire Vorthok Empire with a single word. Every being present could feel that terrible potential hanging in the air. "The oldest law demands that the debt be paid," Tommen said finally. "But it does not demand that payment be made in blood. The Vorthok Empire will surrender half of their fleet to human command. These ships will be used to protect other species from the kind of attack you launched against us." The Vorthok representative started to protest, but Taemin continued speaking. "Your worlds will provide resources to rebuild. What you destroyed, your scientists will work to heal the damage you caused to the planets you attacked. Your engineers will help construct new homes for the families you made homeless. And the leadership of your empire," Taemin's voice grew harder, "will serve 1 year of service for every human life that was taken.
Oh.
They will work to repair the harm they caused and learn the value of the lives they took so carelessly." The math was simple and terrible. 137,000 years of service for the Vorthok leadership. It was a sentence that would outlast the natural lifespan of their species many times over. "That is impossible," the Vorthok representative protested. "Our leaders would be dead long before such a sentence could be completed." "Then their descendants will continue the service," Taemin replied, "and their descendants after them. The debt will be paid in full no matter how long it takes." The ethereal mediator flickered with colors that indicated extreme agitation. "You cannot impose such terms. The Galactic Council has procedures for determining punishment. There are limits to what can be demanded." Taemin looked at the energy being, and for a moment, the mediator's form wavered like a candle in a hurricane wind. "Your procedures exist because the oldest law allows them to exist," Taemin said. "But the oldest law comes first. It is the foundation upon which all other laws are built, and I speak for that foundation now." He spoke one final phrase in the first tongue, and the words settled into the chamber like stones sinking into deep water. Every being present felt the judgment becoming real, weaving itself into the fabric of reality itself. The Vorthok representative tried to argue, to negotiate, to find some way to escape the sentence. But he found that the words would not come. The judgment had been spoken in the language of creation itself, and creation had accepted it. Other alien representatives began to murmur among themselves. Some were afraid of what this meant for their own actions. Others were curious about what other powers humanity might possess. The machine race delegates sent electronic pulses that translated as questions. "How many speakers are there among the humans? How long have you possessed this power?" Taemin smiled, but it was not a cruel expression. "Long enough to know that power should be used wisely and sparingly." He turned to address the full chamber. "The judgment is final. It cannot be changed, cannot be appealed, cannot be defied. The Vorthok Empire will fulfill their obligations, or they will face consequences far worse than service." He spoke these words. Alien representatives throughout the chamber began to realize something that changed their understanding of the galaxy forever. Humanity was not the weak, primitive species they had believed them to be. The humans had been here longer than any of their civilizations. They had been watching, waiting, quietly maintaining the balance that kept the galaxy from destroying itself, and they were not pleased with what they had seen. "This session is concluded," Taemin said, his voice carrying the authority of the words that had spoken stars into existence. "The judgment will be carried out beginning tomorrow." As the alien representatives filed out of the chamber in stunned silence, word of what had happened began to spread throughout the galaxy. On 1,000 worlds, in 100 different languages, the same message was being transmitted. The humans were not what they seemed to be, and the galaxy would never be the same again. 3 days after the judgment, news of what had happened in the Galactic Council chambers had spread to every corner of known space. On worlds that had never heard of humanity before, beings were learning about the species that could speak with the voice of creation itself. The reaction was not what many expected. Instead of fear or respect, some of the more powerful alien civilizations felt anger. They had ruled the galaxy for millennia, and they were not willing to accept that a young species like humanity could challenge their authority. In the war rooms of the Dominion Alliance, a group of the most aggressive alien species were meeting in secret. The alliance included the surviving Vorthok military leaders, the machine collective known as the Nexus, and several other species that believed in ruling through strength. "This cannot stand," declared General Korthok, the highest-ranking Vorthok, a military officer who had not been present at the council session. "If we allow the humans to impose their will on us, every primitive species in the galaxy will think they can challenge our authority." The Nexus representative, a geometric collection of metal and circuits, pulsed with red lights as it spoke. "Our analysis indicates that the human called Taman used some form of advanced technology to create these effects. Technology can be countered with superior technology." But not all of the Alliance members were convinced. The representative from the shadowed reaches, a species that had mastered dark energy manipulation, spoke with a voice like whispers in an empty tomb. "Our ancient records speak of the first tongue," the shadow being said. "If the human truly commands this power, then opposing him directly would be extremely dangerous." General Korthok clicked his mandibles dismissively. "Ancient superstitions. We have plasma cannons that can destroy planets. We have fleets that can reduce star systems to dust. What can one human do against that kind of power?" The Alliance made their decision. They would gather their combined fleets and demand that the Galactic Council reverse the judgment against the Vorthok Empire. If the Council refused, they would take what they wanted by force. Meanwhile, in the human diplomatic quarters, a very different conversation was taking place. Ambassador Hyonzik sat across from Taimine, trying to understand what his colleague had revealed about himself and their species. "You said you have been a speaker since you were 7 years old," Hyonzik said. "How is that possible? How did you learn such power so young?" Taman sipped tea from a simple ceramic cup, looking like any ordinary man enjoying a quiet moment. The terrible power he had displayed in the council chamber seemed to have disappeared completely. "I did not learn it," he said quietly. "I remembered it. All humans carry the memory of the first tongue in their genetic code. Most never access it because they do not need to. But some of us are born with the ability to remember what our species once knew." Mijin leaned forward with interest. As a cultural expert, she was fascinated by what this meant for humanity's place in galactic history. "Are you saying that humans are older than we thought?" she asked. "That our species has been in space longer than our records show?" "Much longer," Taman confirmed. "Humans were among the first species to achieve interstellar travel. We helped guide the early development of galactic civilization, but we chose to step back, to let other species find their own paths." Young Ho shook his head in confusion. "But why? If we had such power, why did we hide it? Why did we let other species treat us like we were primitive and weak?" Taman set down his teacup and looked at the young assistant with sad eyes. "Because power without wisdom leads to tyranny. We learned that lesson long ago. It's better to be underestimated than to become the kind of beings we just judged." Before anyone could respond, an alarm began sounding throughout the diplomatic station. The lights flickered to emergency red, and automated voices began announcing in dozens of languages that hostile fleets were approaching. Dohyun ran to the window and looked out at the stars beyond the station. "There are ships out there. Lots of them. They look like Vorthok designs, but there are other species too." Ambassador Hyonzik activated the communication system and contacted the station's command center. "What is the situation?" "Ambassador, we have confirmation of a large military fleet approaching our position," came the reply. "They are demanding that the Galactic Council reverse the judgment against the Vorthok Empire. They say they will attack if their demands are not met within 1 standard hour." Hyonzik looked at Taman with concern. "Can they do that? Can they just ignore what happened in the council chamber?" Taman stood up and walked to the window. Outside, he could see the approaching ships, hundreds of vessels bristling with weapons, representing the combined military might of some of the galaxy's most aggressive species. "They can try," he said simply. The hour passed quickly. The Galactic Council, faced with overwhelming military force, sent a message to the approaching fleet agreeing to discuss modifying the judgment against the Vorthok Empire. General Korthok, commanding the Alliance fleet from his flagship, allowed himself a moment of satisfaction. He had been right. The humans' display of power had been nothing more than advanced technology and psychological manipulation. Real power came from weapons, and the will to use them. "Prepare boarding parties," he ordered his subordinates. We will occupy the diplomatic station and force the council to reverse their decision completely. The humans will learn that strength is the only truth that matters in this galaxy. But as the first wave of Alliance ships approached the station, something strange began to happen. The space around the diplomatic facilities started to shimmer like heat waves rising from hot metal. On the human quarters observation deck, Taman placed his hand against the transparent aluminum window, where his palm touched the surface. Patterns of light began to spread outward like ripples on a pond. "What are you doing?" Jin asked, reminding the galaxy why humans chose to remain hidden for so long. Taman replied. He began to speak in the first tongue, his voice carrying through the station's communication systems and beyond. The words reached every ship in the Alliance fleet, passing through their hulls and shields as if such barriers did not exist. General Korthok was giving orders to his boarding teams. When the voice reached his command bridge, at first he tried to ignore it, dismissing it as another human trick. But as Taman continued speaking, the Vorthok general began to feel something he had never experienced before. Fear, real. Bone-deep terror that came from suddenly understanding exactly how small and insignificant he truly was. The words Taman spoke were not threats or warnings. They were simply truth. The truth about the nature of existence, about the connections between all living things, about the consequences of using power without wisdom. As the Alliance fleet listened to these words, their weapon systems began to shut down. Not because of any technological interference, but because the weapons themselves were being reminded of their true purpose. Metal and energy and circuit were being asked to remember that they were part of the same universe as the lives they were meant to destroy. One by one, the ships of the Alliance fleet powered down their weapons. Their crews found themselves unable to maintain thoughts of violence and aggression. The words in the first tongue were washing away their anger and replacing it with understanding. General Korthok tried to fight against the effect, to maintain his hatred and desire for conquest. But as Taman's voice continued, the Vorthok general found himself remembering something he had forgotten long ago. He remembered being young. Before the military training and the years of warfare had hardened his heart, he remembered caring about something other than power and domination. He remembered what it felt like to value life instead of destroying it. The Alliance fleet began to withdraw without firing a single shot. As they departed, their crews carried with them a new understanding of their place in the galaxy and the consequences of their actions in the diplomatic station. Taman finished speaking and turned away from the window. The terrible power that had filled his voice faded, leaving behind only the quiet man his colleagues had always known. "Is it over?" Young Ho asked. "For now," Taman replied. "But word of what happened here will spread. Other species will learn that humanity is not as defenseless as they believed. Some will choose to treat us with more respect. Others will become even more hostile." Ambassador Hyansik stood up and looked out at the stars where the Alliance fleet was disappearing into hyperspace. "What happens next?" Taman smiled, and for the first time since the crisis began, it was a genuinely happy expression. "Next, we continue doing what humans have always done best. We help build a better galaxy, one word at a time." As news of the Alliance fleet's withdrawal spread throughout known space, a new understanding began to emerge. Humanity was not just another species seeking membership in the galactic community. They were the guardians who had been watching over that community since its earliest days, and on worlds throughout the galaxy, other humans began to reveal themselves. Quiet teachers and humble merchants, unnoticed translators and overlooked technicians, all removing simple pendants from beneath their clothes and letting the galaxy know that the speakers had never truly disappeared.